Alabama. Then I came to Tennessee, and I
They don't
thought
transfer?
I thought it would be automatic. It was not, and mine doesn't have the star on it. So I got to go stand in line. So.
That blows. Once again, why did they not just institute? I cannot be the only person that thought
The
of this.
only reason I didn't ask was because I thought that by then all
It was
of them,
automatic.
right? And so I have a non-compliant ID.
I don't understand why it's not automatic. That could be a subject of an edition of All the Best Words, but it's not today's subject. Hey, friends, and welcome. My name is Matt Murphy, and I say all the best words.
My name's Cameron Smith. I write all the best words.
And together, this is All the Best Words.
I know words. I have the best words.
This is All the Best Words with Matt Murphy and Cameron Smith.
All the best words. I've always wanted to do that.
Yeah.
Hello and welcome. Like and subscribe. Do us a favor. Tell a friend or a neighbor that All the Best Words is on your favorite podcast platform, either in a video or audio format. You would do us a favor by just giving us the old thumbs up. How about that?
We like those.
We do like the old thumbs up. And we will try to please you over the next 10 or 12 minutes. We try to keep it simple, short, simple, to the point. You're busy people. You got busy lives. You want to move on with it. But we're here to entertain you with 2 words.
2 words. And I'll say I really appreciate on social media when people reach out to us there and say, hey, I was listening. Here's what I thought about this. Could you smile more? Could you say nice, happy things? And the answer is maybe. So, yeah, at D. Cameron Smith. What about you?
Does this look forced?
It does.
Matt at murphyshow.com. That's a good place for an email, or at Matt Murphy Show on the old Twitterverse. The X Machine is my favorite cesspool.
Yeah.
I enjoy it.
Catch us there.
All right, you want me to start?
I do.
I'm going to start. So if you're watching locally, we present this broadcast. We film in Nashville, Tennessee, but I know people listen and watch all over the country and all over the world. In Nashville, Tennessee, there's a little suburb called Antioch. And my word today is Antioch, because a few things happened over the last week or so in Nashville, Tennessee, that have begun to make national headlines. It involves Immigration and Customs Enforcement, the Highway Patrol, the Tennessee Department of Safety, and the Metro Nashville Police Department really wants you to know this, not the local police.
Definitely not.
Definitely not. It was deemed a public safety operation by which the Tennessee Highway Patrol and ICE worked together and went to a particular suburb of Nashville. And there's a reason why they went to Antioch. And the reason was there's a lot of crime activity that goes on in Antioch. There is a lot of reported gang activity that goes on in Antioch. And there are a lot of Hispanics in Antioch. Now, the first 2, I'm certain the Tennessee Highway Patrol and ICE would be happy for you to know about. The third one, they're not really talking about, but here's the deal. They're going to where the criminal elements are. And if the idea is to get criminal activity off the street, particularly criminal activity of an illegal alien nature, that's probably the place that they're going to find it. And obviously they did. They initiated about 150 plus traffic stops. As of this taping, the arrests were around 84, I believe. So that's a pretty high percentage.
Yeah.
That tells me, regardless of what you think about this, regardless of whether you think it's targeting or not, it tells me that you apparently were in the right place in that you initiated 150 traffic stops, and these were on moving violations. These were on legit lane change violation, or you're speeding, or you're doing this or that. And then once you identify the people as best you can in that vehicle, you identify 84 instances of criminal behavior beyond the traffic stop itself. Yeah, I think you're in the right place. I applaud it. I think it's good. I think it's positive for our community, despite what local leadership might tell you. And they have freaked out, Cameron. Mayor Freddie O'Connell and other Metro Nashville city councilors are freaking out. They want the public to know that they disagree with this. They want the public to know that this is not something that they approve of or had any part of. And I'm scratching my head thinking, why? Why would you not want to be a part of getting lawbreakers off the street? It doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but they seem more determined to make sure that the public at large in Nashville, Tennessee knows that they weren't a part of it than they do actually addressing the criminal behavior. none of them are saying, because they can't, that this is in any way illegal, that it is in any way, criminal profiling or racially profiling anybody. But they do want you to know that they weren't a part of any of this.
Yeah, and they've been pretty clear about that. I actually wrote a column on this very topic because it's an area that my family frequents. There's incidentally a very vibrant and robust Hispanic community. They have places there where you can go hear a mariachi band, fantastic food, bakeries, everything. Like, it's super cool. And so we go down there, and I got a little placard on my car while we were there at a flea market, talking about how you should respond legally if ICE shows up, because there was a very real concern about, hey, they're going to start enforcing the immigration laws, to which I said, okay, we should enforce the immigration laws. I understand why people are afraid. And you know whose fault it is? All those politicians that didn't enforce the laws on the books for so long. And when people start, they automatically go to profiling, saying, why were you there? Well, you know what? We can look at crime statistics. We can see some of this stuff. And so when we look and there is a lawful traffic stop, for example, you can then ascertain somebody's identification, and there are other things that you can look into. The profiling, the saying, you are Hispanic, and therefore I can pull you over and say, prove it that you're here lawfully. The DOJ has memos out on this. All law enforcement understand racial profiling is unconstitutional, and you will be challenged legally.
Racial profiling is unconstitutional. Profiling, and I remember when those two terms of art got conflated a little bit. And people wanted to, cut off the racial and just say profiling. Profiling is a perfectly, if done properly, is a perfectly acceptable way of identifying criminal behavior and criminal activity. What you cannot do is suggest that there's criminal behavior or criminal activity going on merely by, conditions that person had nothing to do with, a condition of their birth, for example.
Right.
Like, skin color, ethnicity.
Protected classes. And that's what we have to be careful with. And law enforcement knows that. And they also know that the media is going to be watching them, and they should, right?
Sure.
And so when you are pulling people over to make lawful arrest or lawful stops for traffic violations, other things like that, when you know that there have been crimes committed repeatedly, you need to start paying attention. And that's a perfectly legal justification for being in an area and investigating, hey, what's going on here? And then when you catch people who are here without legal status, there's consequences for that.
And by the way, up until the 1930s, Antioch was a far away country outpost, which is kind of funny for those of us who live in Nashville, Tennessee, to consider that. But it was considered to be way out in the country back in the 1930s and 1940s, which amuses me. Your word, sir?
So my word's actually related, and it's law. It's a very simple word. It's one that we don't seem to really understand here. And in this context of immigration, there are human costs. And I want to be real clear about that. That when people have established their lives in an area over time, when you disrupt that, it impacts them negatively. And we should be very aware that that is a reality. And I understand why people can have empathy for that and say, hey, if I were in your shoes, that's terrible. I understand that. But law. Mm-hmm. We are a nation of laws. We hear rule of law, that sort of thing. We don't think about what it means. But a law, basically any level in the United States has to go through a deliberative legislative process and then have an executive endorsement. Like, that's generally how we do this. And then we say this is a duly enacted law. Now, the executive at whatever level enforces that law. Why? Because our elected representatives have said this is important enough for us to have a statute that you are going to enforce law enforcement. And if not, we should repeal it. If we are not going to enforce the law, we should not have the law. And you know how you change the law? You go right back through that same process.
Yep.
And so we have, at some point, decided that we should give equal weight to justified empathy and the rule of law. There's nothing wrong with doing both simultaneously, of saying we are obliged to enforce the law, and we recognize some of these consequences on families, on businesses, on communities are rough. If you guys want to change that, we can, but let's go through the process and have that discussion.
I feel very similarly to you on this, where the law is what it is. And for those that are mewling and crying and gnashing their teeth about the disruption of families, I can understand that, and I'll address that in a second. But that does not change that the law is what the law is. And if you feel strongly enough, if you're a liberal, political liberal in Nashville or wherever, you feel strongly enough that you are right, you make the case to the people, you have fellow potential candidates step up to the plate, run for election,
Sure.
get elected, and you change the law in the fashion that you just described it and make it in a vision that you believe better reflects your community of the United States of America. That's the way you do it. What you don't do is you don't get to just ignore it and act as if it does not exist. And for far too long, sadly, in America, we've been largely ignoring immigration laws. And we have leaned on the emotional side of this for far too long. And now the Trump administration is trying to draw us back into compliance with the law. And that's going to be hurtful. And I understand that. I genuinely, I've said many times on my radio show that there but for the grace of God go I. That if I were born in certain countries in the world and I recognize that I could violate a law that I consider to be victimless, now, it could be an argument whether it is or not, but that I consider to be victimless, that I could benefit myself, that I could benefit my family, that I could create a new start in the greatest country on earth, you bet your sweet bippy I'm going to do that. I don't blame those individuals. I do blame the lawbreakers and the criminal element that have learned to take advantage of the system, and I blame the system itself for allowing this to go on for such a time where now you have people that have had 10, 15, 20 years, even more in some cases, of roots laid down, and they don't have any legal status in this country. I made the comparison of I owned a home in Helena, Alabama. And there was a long hill in the backyard. I'll try to make this quick. And at the base of that hill was a fence. And leaves had been, for years, long before I got to the home, leaves would fall and they would go to the bottom of the hill and they would find the fence and they would pile up. And they had done this for so long that literally my dog could look over the fence. A fence that was supposed to be over 5 feet had become like 2.5 feet. I had to do something about it. So the first layer of leaves, that's easy. That involves just, a leaf blower.
Right.
The second layer of leaves, that's pretty easy. That involves a rake. I get to a point where I have to ask myself, how far down am I willing to dig before it becomes too much of a problem and there might be a better way of doing this? In America, I think we have to deal with that with regard to our immigration system. Mm-hmm. We have to figure out how deeply we're going to go to uproot people who have been here, who have had babies here, whose children have established lives here. And I don't think that's all the way back. I don't think we're going to go all the way back. But I do think if you've come here over the last 5 to 6 years, you should have an expectation that if you don't have legal documentation, that there might be a knock on your door at some point or another.
And I think the pain point of enforcement is perfectly fine because it creates the motivation to change the law. And I absolutely think some of the silliness is, well, if you're caught on an immigration violation, you might have a 5-year ban to come back in or a 10-year ban. And that's just what the law says. We need to look at that and say, I want you to leave and go through the right process. I don't want to tell you, you now need to leave and you can't come back for a huge chunk of your life. There's ways we can address this and have this conversation. We cannot have this conversation in a vacuum of enforcement. When we say we don't want the law to be actively enforced, we want it to be palatable. No, we want it to be enforced as it was written, as it's been enacted into law. And then if you want to change it, because it's harsh, it's draconian, it's antiquated, all right, let's have that discussion. Enforcement is critical to that discussion. So if you're a liberal Democrat, you need to look at this and say, actually, this enforcement gives me the best chance to change the law and make it a more sympathetic system, a system that has sympathy. We are a nation of immigrants that pays homage to that. Okay, fine. You can't do that unless we enforce the law.
Well, I have to lay down the law and tell you that we're out of time on this edition of All the Best Words. He is Cameron Smith. Thank you, Cameron.
I write all the best words.
I say all the best words, and we invite you to join us next time on what is All the Best Words.